The camera is already rolling before I say a word. You hear my breathing first, not the calm, steady kind, the other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below your ribs when your body has already figured out what your brain is still refusing to accept. The flashlight in my hand sweeps left and catches a wall of dust falling from the ceiling, slow and thick, like the building has been quietly dying for years and only just decided to let someone watch. It sweeps right and lands on a door frame so warped it looks like it tried to become something else and failed halfway through. Then, from somewhere behind me, deep inside the structure, a sound travels upward through the floors and arrives in my chest before it reaches my ears. Not a creak, not a crack, a groan, low and deliberate, the sound of a building making a decision about itself. Then it stops, and the silence that follows is heavier than the sound was, because at least the sound told me something was happening. The silence tells me nothing. I turn to the camera. Half my face disappears into the dark behind me. The half that is visible is pale and completely still. No performance in it, no rehearsed composure, just a face in the process of telling the truth. And I say it, the way you say something when you are done pretending otherwise. I have done this over 200 times. I have walked into places that should have killed me and walked back out of every single one without a scratch. I have never once stood inside an abandoned building and felt the real, quiet, unshakable certainty that I was not going to make it out. Until this one. Cut to black. No music, no title card. Just silence sitting where sound was. And already, before I have told you a single fact about this place, you are asking the one question I need you to ask.
What is in that building? And what did it do to someone who has survived over 200 of them? I did make it out, but I want to be honest with you. The person who walked back out was not quite the same person who walked in. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what I mean by that. Before we go any further, I need you to answer something for me in the comments. Have you ever walked into a place and felt before anything had gone wrong, before any visible danger had shown itself, that something already had? I want to be honest with you before we go any further, because everything I am about to tell you only makes sense if you understand who I am and what I actually do. I am not a thrill seeker. I know that is the assumption. The moment someone says urban explorer, a very specific image forms in your mind, and I completely understand why it exists, because a large number of people who do this are exactly that image. Young, reckless, treating condemned structures like a playground, kicking indoors, sprinting from security guards, and posting the footage online for the rush of it. That is not this. That has never been this. I do this work because someone has to. When a building gets sealed or quietly demolished or simply removed from the public record without explanation, every piece of history inside it disappears with it. The tools laid out on the workbench by hands that never came back to collect them, the files still sitting in the cabinets, the last entry in the logbook that nobody ever finished writing. That is not abandoned property. That is evidence that real human lives happened inside those walls, and when the building goes, those lives go with it, unless someone documents what is there first. I carry professional equipment. I carry backup lighting, a radio, a first aid kit, and a written log I fill out before I enter and continuously as I move through a space. I have protocols for floor instability, for hazardous materials, and for situations where the way I came in becomes inaccessible. I built those protocols over years of understanding exactly how fast things can go wrong inside a structure that has been left to deteriorate for decades. That calm, that methodology, that trained composure is the most important tool I own. It has kept me functioning and alive across 214 locations. I have stood on floors flexing under my weight and stayed focused. I have been inside structures during heavy rain and held steady through sounds that made it nearly impossible to distinguish settling from collapse. I have documented factories where the last shift's work was still sitting on the machines, hospitals where the patient records were still open on the intake desk, and a country house sealed for 42 years where the chandelier was still hanging in the ballroom and still intact. In every one of those places, I felt awe, sadness, responsibility, and occasionally real fear when something gave way unexpectedly. But in all of those locations, across all of those years, I never felt what I felt at this one. And here's the part that I cannot fully explain, even now, months later, having had a great deal of time to sit with it. I felt it outside, before I crossed a single threshold, before I touched a single door. I was walking the perimeter, doing my standard pre-entry check, and the silence stopped me in a way silence has never stopped me before. Not quiet, not simply the absence of sound.
A silence with weight to it, with intention behind it. The kind of silence that feels less like nothing is there, and more like everything nearby has agreed to stay away. I wrote it in my log. I noted it as an anomaly. And then I went inside anyway because that is what I do. I have thought many times since that night about whether I would make the same choice again. The answer is still yes, but it is a quieter yes than it used to be. So tell me something in the comments before we go any further. Has there ever been a moment in your life where a place felt wrong before anything had actually gone wrong inside it? Because I used to think that feeling was just noise. I do not think that anymore. I am not going to tell you the name of this building or the city it is in. I know that bothers some of you, and I understand why, because transparency is something I take seriously in this work, and withholding information always feels like a small dishonesty toward the people who watch these videos and trust me to be straight with them. But I have watched what happens when a location gets publicly identified, and I cannot do that to this place. 3 years ago, I documented a former children's sanatorium and mentioned the county it was in during the video. Within 8 months, the interior had been completely stripped, the walls covered in paint, and a section of the building partially burned by trespassers. 70 years of untouched history gone in less than a year, because enough people knew roughly where to look. I will not make that mistake again. What I can tell you is this. The structure is large industrial in origin, officially sealed for over 30 years with no public record explaining why. No news coverage of the closure, no documentation of the workforce being laid off or relocated, no local historical material of any kind that I could find. It exists in the public record as a building that was operating and then simply was not, with no story connecting those two states, no explanation offered to anyone. That absence of explanation is itself significant, and it is something I kept returning to during the weeks I spent trying to research the location before I went in. I arrived at dusk because the light through damaged upper windows at that hour is better for interior photography than midday light, which creates contrast too extreme to hold detail in the shadow areas. I parked well away from the building and walked the perimeter slowly, which is standard practice. The outer walls were in worse condition than the structure's age alone would explain.
Sections of brickwork had been patched multiple times in ways that suggested urgent repair rather than planned maintenance. There were warning signs mounted at intervals along the walls, the adhesive kind, the kind you put up quickly when something needs to be communicated fast. Most of them were too degraded to read. One was not. I am not going to tell you what it said. I photographed it, and I stood there reading it twice, and then I kept walking, because stopping to process it fully in that moment was not something I was ready to do. The entry point was a ground-level window on the north face where the boarding had rotted through enough to be moved. Standard. But the moment I crossed the threshold and stood inside for the first time, the air changed. Not temperature, not smell, though the smell was present and wrong in its own way. The quality of the air itself felt different, heavier, like the atmosphere inside the building was operating under different rules than the atmosphere outside it. I have entered hundreds of sealed structures. I have never felt that before. I stood just inside the entry point for longer than I normally would, adjusting, trying to get my bearings on a feeling I did not have language for yet. And then I noticed the door at the far end of the first corridor. Heavy, industrial. The lock mechanism was on the outside, not the inside. The outside meaning it was not designed to keep people out. It was designed to keep something in. I wrote it in my log. I kept moving, but my hand was not entirely steady when I wrote it. Tell me something in the comments. If you had seen that door, would you have kept moving, or would you have turned around right there? The first few rooms were standard. That is the word I kept writing in my log as I moved through them. Standard. Large rectangular spaces with high ceilings and concrete floors covered with decades of fallen plaster and broken glass. Industrial shelves were fixed to the walls. They were empty, but still bolted in place. In one room, there was a long workbench with tools still lying on it. The tools were so rusted, they had almost become part of the surface beneath them. I have seen this in many places before. Workers leave during a normal day and never return. Whatever they left on the bench simply stays there for decades, like a frozen moment of the last day the building was alive. I photographed everything and moved on. The fourth room made me stop. It was smaller than the others and looked like some kind of office. There was a desk and 2 filing cabinets with the drawers left open. Files were still inside, but they had absorbed years of moisture and were now stuck together into heavy blocks of paper. On the desk, there was a logbook. It was not hidden. It was open on the desk, as if someone had just stepped away for a few minutes and planned to return. I put on my gloves before touching it, like I always do. I turned to the last page and read the final entry. The sentence stopped in the middle. Not at a period, not even at a comma. It stopped exactly where the next word should have been written, but never was. I have seen unfinished records before, but this felt different. A sentence that ends in the middle of a word suggests something sudden happened. Something that did not give the writer time to finish even a single thought. I photographed the page and then noticed the calendar hanging on the wall above the desk. It was open to a specific month. I wrote the date in my log and went into the next room. There was another calendar on that wall, different design, but the same month and the same year. I stood still for a moment and then moved into the next room. A third calendar. Again, the same month and the same year. 3 different rooms and 3 calendars, all stopped on the same date. 1 calendar can be coincidence. 2 can still have an explanation. 3 is harder to ignore.
It felt as if time inside the building had stopped on one specific day. I wrote it down and kept moving, but my pace had slowed without me deciding to slow down. My body had made that decision before my mind did. Tell me something honestly in the comments. If you walked into 3 rooms in a row and saw the same date on 3 different calendars, what would you think happened on that day?
About 40 minutes after entering the building, something happened that made the structure stop making sense. Up to that point, the layout was unusual, but still understandable. Large rooms connected to smaller rooms and corridors, like most industrial buildings. Then I turned a corner and entered a corridor that should not have existed. I know that sounds strange, but I track my position inside large buildings, so I always know where the exits are. This corridor ran in a direction and distance that placed its end outside the building's outer walls, based on the measurements I had taken earlier.
I know that sounds strange, but I track my position inside large buildings, so I always know where the exits are. This corridor ran in a direction and distance that placed its end outside the building's outer walls based on the measurements I had taken earlier. Just a flat metal surface with 4 thick bolts fixed into the frame. The rust around the bolts showed they had not been moved in many years. Something was sealed behind that door, and it had been sealed deliberately. Around this moment, my camera began acting strangely. It was not shutting off, but it hesitated. The autofocus would start and then suddenly stop. The screen would freeze for a few seconds and then recover. I checked the battery. It was full. I checked the settings and nothing had changed. I have used that camera in harsh conditions before, and it had never behaved like this. I stood there, looking at the sealed door in a corridor that should not exist, while my camera struggled to focus on something I could not see.
I had a decision to make. I could turn back or keep going. I decided to keep going. I am still not sure whether that decision came from professional discipline or simple stubborn curiosity. But that was the last moment when turning around would have been easy. Tell me in the comments if your equipment started acting strangely in a place that already made no sense. Would you keep exploring or leave immediately?
Beyond that corridor, there was a large open room. It was the biggest space I had seen inside the building so far, and it immediately felt like the central room of the structure. The ceiling was higher, and the floor was noticeably cleaner than the rest of the building. Not perfectly clean, but clearly less covered in debris. That alone made me pause at the doorway. A building abandoned for 30 years should not have one room that looks maintained. I stepped inside and began documenting. Along the far wall, there was a stack of sealed supply containers. They looked like the kind used for long-term food storage. I walked closer and checked the printed dates on the containers. The dates were years after the building had officially closed. Not months, years. I checked several more containers and they all had similar dates. Someone had been using this room long after the building was supposed to be empty.
I slowly turned around and looked at the room again with new understanding.
That was when I noticed the walls. They were covered in handwriting. Every wall from about waist height to as high as someone could reach was filled with lines of writing. This was not graffiti. The writing was careful and organized, like someone documenting thoughts step by step. I began reading the sections closest to me.
The early parts were clear and structured like someone carefully recording observations. But farther along the wall, the writing changed. The letters became larger. The spacing between words disappeared. Sentences broke apart and repeated the same phrases again and again. Some words were carved so deeply into the surface that they left grooves in the wall. The writing told a story of a person slowly losing control over time. I documented as much of it as I could, but my voice on the recording from that room is much quieter than usual. I did not decide to speak softly. It simply happened. Some places make you lower your voice without explaining why. Tell me honestly in the comments, if you found walls filled with writing that started calm and ended in desperation, what would be the first question you would ask before leaving that room? While documenting the last section of writing, I stepped forward carefully like I had done the entire time inside the building. My left foot moved forward and placed weight onto the floor. For about 1 second, the floor held. Then it did not. A section of the floor suddenly collapsed beneath me. It was not a full collapse, only one side gave way. My left leg fell through the broken section, while my right leg stayed on the remaining floor. I was stuck at an angle, with my leg trapped through the floor up to my thigh. I could not move quickly. Any sudden movement might cause the rest of the floor to collapse and send me falling into the darkness below. So I stayed completely still and controlled my breathing. Slowly, I looked down through the opening in the floor. There was a room below, and it was not empty. The space underneath was clearly organized. Equipment and materials were arranged neatly, as if someone had been working there regularly. This lower room looked active and purposeful, even though the building above it had supposedly been abandoned for more than 30 years. I realized something in that moment. Everything I had seen upstairs suddenly made sense. The strange calendars, the logbook, the sealed doors, the writing on the walls. All of it existed directly above a hidden lower level that had been deliberately created and hidden from the outside world. I had been walking above it the entire time without knowing. Hanging there partially through the floor, I realized I had misunderstood the entire building from the moment I entered. The real story was beneath my feet. But before I could investigate any of that, I had to get myself out of the broken floor. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment when one discovery suddenly changed the meaning of everything you had seen before? After finally pulling myself back onto solid ground, I sat down for a while to calm my breathing. Then I started thinking about everything I had seen. The evidence was clear when viewed together. The building had not simply been abandoned. After its official closure, it had been secretly used again for years. Someone had brought supplies into it long after it was sealed. Specific rooms were maintained while the rest of the building was allowed to decay, so no one would question its condition. The hidden lower level had been intentionally built and hidden from public records. The door with the lock on the outside was not unusual anymore. It was functional.
The corridor that should not exist likely led to access for the underground space. The writing on the walls now looked like the record of someone trapped there over time. Every strange detail now formed one connected story. Getting out of the broken floor had taken me 20 minutes. 20 slow minutes of shifting my weight carefully while the floor creaked around me. Every movement had to be controlled. Panic would only make things worse. Eventually, I reached stable ground and sat there shaking. Not from exhaustion, but from the realization of what I had discovered. Some discoveries permanently change the way you understand a place. This was one of them. So I want to ask you something. If you discovered something like this inside a building, would you share it with the world or leave it hidden? Since leaving that building, I have been thinking about one question again and again. Should I have documented that place at all? My entire work is built on the belief that documenting forgotten places preserves history. But this building challenged that belief, because sometimes documenting something does not preserve it. Sometimes it exposes something that may have been deliberately hidden. The writing on those walls belonged to someone who never chose to have their story told. By filming it, I made that decision for them. I always believed that if history is not recorded, it disappears forever. But now I am not completely sure. There may be places that remain sealed for a reason. Places where opening them changes the meaning of what happened there. So I want to hear your honest opinion. Not just a reaction, but a real thought. Do you believe every hidden place should be documented, or are there some stories that should remain sealed forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this question has stayed with me since the night I left that building, and I still do not know the answer.